Thank you very much, John, and thank you, McNally Jackson, for hosting this virtual event. When I wrote the column that these three debut novelists appear in, I knew I had some great books in that list. What I didn't realize when I was reading all of them is that something would happen that would derail their release. I mean, they all came out on time, but like I had a book that came out at the same time, it didn't come out in the way that anyone would expect. And, you know, because I've had numerous books published, I was quite aware of, you know, the normal process, but I got to thinking, you know, these debut novelists have never had a book come out before. They don't know what to compare it to. And also I realized that nobody at that moment was really thinking about books in the way that they might have been otherwise. So I wanted to organize this reading not only to highlight horror fiction, which obviously I love and like to support, but to highlight these three debut novelists and their exemplary novels, and hope that everyone here will you know, read them if you haven't already, talk about them, share you know, your opinions far and wide about them. So to introduce you to just a taste of their work, they're going to read just a couple of minutes from their books. I think the opening, I don't know, and you know, I'll have just each one of them read that passage sort of back to back, and then I'm going to jump in and ask some questions. And I think, as John said, feel free to write questions for the authors in the chat box, and I will relay that to them. So I think we're just going to go in alphabetical order. How about Rachel? Do you mind starting with a short passage from the return?
I have it right here. Sure. I'm a little rusty.
I know, and we're not really reading in public, are we?
So this is about 18 pages in, just at the beginning of the book. It was around then that it really started to eat at me in a way I could no longer control. What if something had gone wrong? An unsettling amount of time had passed. What if she was chained up in some cult leader's basement, carving notches into the wall to mark the passing days, subsisting on paste like oatmeal and brownish water and the occasional kindness from Mr. Discount Koresh, who was crazy but conflicted. Children are taken from sidewalks, plucked from bus stops by strangers in old, unassuming station wagons. You read stories, ones that turn your eyes into magnets. It's almost like it's against your will, or that's what you want to believe. You don't want to admit that you're interested, that you want to know about the duct tape or the DNA evidence found in the trunk of the car when it turns up months later, even though the kid never does. Women are kidnapped in parking garages, at laundromats from their beds, while out for the morning runs. It happens all the time, taken by men who feel a sense of entitlement, a right to female bodies, men who are dropped on their heads as babies or raised by mommy dearest. Julie wouldn't have gone quietly. Julie would have screamed, thrashed around, bitten, scratched, gouged. Julie would have made things bloody. She wouldn't have vanished without a trace. But she had. They never found anything. Not a scrap of clothing, not a scent, not a single witness.
Thank you. And now Elisabeth Thomas, alphabetical. Molly, I'm like, what's alphabetical? Molly, could you read a passage from your book? Are you going to start at the beginning, or are you going in a little bit too?
Yeah, just the beginning.
Okay, great.
So here we go. You killed me. Remember that. Yes, I remember. I remember. You don't remember me. I may not remember you, but I cannot forget you. I poke my finger a little further underneath the scab, and the pain radiates like the heel of your palm, pressed against your closed eyelid, all starbursts and twinkles. I am dead, I am dying, I am dying, you are dead. It throbs and pulses, and my arm twitches 3 times and then falls still. The way Isolde moved, it was like she was defusing a bomb all day long. If you were defusing a bomb or, say, building a house of cards that for some reason your life depends upon, you will move slowly and carefully, every move measured. She moves to make herself seen, but only because a disaster could be imminent, and everyone needs to be accounted for in a disaster. The skin on her forehead was so paper thin that you could see the messages her brain sent to her body. Take a step with your right leg, now the left, and the right again. Brush that lock of hair off your cheek. Smile. Stop smiling. It was the way she moved that caught your eye in the beginning. Each foot lifted too high and set down too precisely, and you would be forgiven for looking above her head to see whether she had strings, or peeking around her back expecting a rotating handle. The next thing you would notice would be the folds of black crepe that constituted her morning dress, so voluminous that you wondered how many people had died to inspire such a display of lamentation. Had a fire turned her extended family to ash? Had they been poisoned by a vengeful maid? You were not to know that her clothing was merely the work of an overzealous aunt and her slavish seamstress, who drowned the poor girl's frame in enough yards of dyed muslin to clothe the inmates of a small orphanage. And as for the death, there was only one, years ago, one. And it resulted in all of this, the clothes and everything that came before and after, just the one.
Thank you. And now, Elisabeth, do you prefer Elisabeth or do you prefer Lizzie? Because I've heard people call you both.
Either, Lizzie, yeah, Lizzie's fine.
Okay, so Lizzie, are you reading from the beginning or are you?
It's going to be just a few pages in, exactly 8 pages in.
Okay,
it's just a very short passage. Catherine House. No, it wasn't a college exactly, though it was accredited as such, my second interviewer had explained as she waved steam off a mug of hot lemon water. We were sitting in her sterile white marble kitchen. As she spoke, she tapped her mug with a sapphire-ringed finger. You went there, right? I said. To Catherine? She inclined her head in gentle assent. So you know, I said, if it isn't a college, what is it? She kept tapping her mug. I couldn't read her expression. What was Catherine exactly? Let's say a community of minds, a crucible of experimental reformist liberal arts study, research and development institute for the most radical new material sciences, a post-secondary school more selective than any Ivy League and so terrifically endowed that tuition was free to any student lucky enough to be accepted. A tiny, pioneering, fanatically private place that by some miracle of chemistry produced some of the world's best minds, prize-winning authors, artists and inventors, diplomats, senators, Supreme Court justices, 2 presidents of the United States. A school and an estate, a complex confection of architecture and design, a house, a magnificent house, miles off the highway in Black Woods behind a long iron gate.
Thank you. So I think from those 3 excerpts, you can tell that all 3 writers have different tone, different style, and you can sort of get in at an angle to the reason why they've been classified, whether by themselves or by somebody else, as horror writers. I've found that for myself anyway, my work was classified often by other people. I've written in different genres. And so my first question, I guess, to these authors is, did you see yourself when you were writing this as writing in the horror genre, or were you just writing something that you loved and something that interests you, and did that come after? Let's start, how about we start with Lizzie, because she went last.
Sure. I did not, when I was writing it, I did not think necessarily that I was writing in any one particular genre. I knew kind of the influences that I was thinking of. I was kind of thinking of kind of Gothic, historical Gothic fiction. Like I was kind of thinking of like Jane Eyre and Rebecca and things like that. But I wasn't really thinking of how it would be. I think that genre the way it is now is so much, it's about marketing. And I was kind of, in my mind, I was kind of like, I'm going to get it wrong. I don't know anything about how to market a book. So I kind of went in with the attitude of, I'm going to write the best book that I can. And then it's going to be some wonderful other person's job, hopefully, to kind of think about what label the people who would most enjoy the story, how they would find it. So no, I wasn't particularly thinking of like, oh, this will be a horror book, but I was thinking of kind of the traditions and the tropes that I was going to be playing with.
Yeah, and I mean, Gothic fiction, when people think of horror, they often don't think of Gothic fiction as being part of that, but really it's very foundational to what that genre is, and also female writers. And so I love that there's a Gothic element in your book, and also in Molly's. Molly's book is very Gothic infused. I think Molly and I were on a panel together once before, and I think that you said in that panel that you weren't really aware so much of that genre. What brought you to use these tropes and this, this style of writing? What interests you about Gothic?
I think I had some of the same probably influences, Elisabeth, Jane Eyre, probably more Wuthering Heights, and I think I did sort of consider like body horror to be more of an angle I was going for. I think, I haven't read enough horror, so I sort of, the first thing I think when I think of horror is Stephen King. And then I'm like, oh, I'll put that over there in my brain.
Yeah.
But I think, a lot of these Gothic books were sort of the horror of the day, like, Jane Eyre and the Mad Woman in the Attic. I mean, that's pretty horrific. So I think there isn't really so much of a Gothic genre right now. At least it's not as like well defined as horror. So I think that the cool thing about Gothic is that it can involve so many different elements. It can be funny. But it was sort of surprising to have written a horror novel, but.
Yeah, but I think so. Something that's wonderful to me about horror as a genre, especially right now, right? Because I do think so many people, when they think of the word horror, they think slasher, anti-female, really bloody, kids getting slaughtered here and there. And I think that that's a very sort of narrow way of looking at horror. And what I love about all three of these books is they explode that idea in a unique way, each one very separately. And also they're quite female centric and really around women's experiences in a way that I think, in the beginning with Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights and then moving up into Rebecca and those novels, female experience was emphasized, but maybe in the 80s and 90s it was less so, right? And so I think that we're at this sort of golden moment where a lot of writers and debut novelists like yourselves are sort of taking that back. Rachel, I don't know, I'm just guessing, but I feel like maybe of the three, you were the most intentionally constructing a horror novel, not just because of the way that it's constructed in the subject matter, but also the tone. There is really a sense of menace, and it's frightening. And, but also you bring in this very contemporary and funny element too. So were you thinking about those ideas when you were writing?
Yeah, I wanted to write a horror novel about female friendship. I pitched it as The Shining, but about female friendship. And there's definitely heavy Shining influence, and Jennifer's Body was another big influence for me. I just think horror is such a cool avenue to explore things we experience, especially female experiences. And I think it's also a really fun genre to play in. It's, it doesn't have to be for me, this, I think story comes first. So you have the idea of I want to tell a story about female friendship, and then the horror kind of, how can the horror elevate the story and make it unique? And how can you kind of explore these avenues and real emotions and real fear in kind of a fantastical way that makes it a little bit more fun? And I think a lot of people are gravitating towards horror right now because the world is so shitty. fictional fear is much more like appealing than real fear. So it's almost like escaping into that fictional fear is like a vacation because you know it's not real.
Yeah. So I love that you said that, because for me, I think the world is a horrible place. Actually, if you start looking at history and you start looking at what we've experienced as a species, it's a miracle that anyone is writing romance or happy literary fiction or beach reads at all. Like, that's where I'm coming from. And, when people talk about, the sort of political elements that are being infused into horror, for example, in film, like Parasite or Get Out, like those amazing films that, sort of blended horror with political satire, and, for Get Out, and then Parasite with about class, those ideas actually are very much a part of the whole genre from the beginning. And so I think it's really cool, that we're taking it back and exploring that. But I also love something that you said, Rachel, about how the world right now feels like horror is on par with the energy. For me, the sort of glut of horrible stuff happening in the news has a kind of energy that is matched by the intensity of horror. And so I guess I was wondering, about tone, and the tone of all three of your books. It's quite different, right? And I think people who listen to you read just those short excerpts about, could feel the difference in tone. And I'm wondering if, maybe this is a little bit of an abstract question, but how, as writers, did you create that tone? And I'll just take a step back to also say, like, people often ask me, what is horror, right? And I don't say it has to have this, this, and this. And for me, what horror is a feeling. It's a tone. And I think maybe your works were categorized that way because of your use of tone. So I don't know. I don't want to like throw an abstract question at you. And if you don't have an answer, that's okay. You can just say, I don't know. But I'm interested to hear about how you came to the very particular tone that you have. Rachel, do you want to start since you went last?
Sure. So I kind of write in character. Like, I find the character first, and then whatever their voices really influence the tone. So I don't set out to write like a specific tone. But I will say, I think, both Molly and Lizzie's books are really funny. Like, there's really funny moments in both of their books. And I try and infuse humor in my writing as well.
Your books are really funny too. Your book is really funny too.
I kind of love that like all of the tones are like dark and very like within the realm of horror. But I think telling these female stories in horror and having them be funny is just an interesting intersection. Maybe I'm diverting the question, but it was just something I noticed in terms of tone. Like, they're all dark books. They're very dark books, but like, I was laughing out loud reading both of their books. So I just think that was an interesting, unique experience.
Yeah,
I know that too. It's true. I think humor goes with horror for some reason. Like, especially like with movies and with books, it's funny because in some ways it's the darkest genre, but and yet there's something about it that tends to lend itself to humor as well, I think.
I recently, one of my favorite movies is a Japanese horror film, Battle Royale, and it's so dark, and it's hilarious, and you're sort of like, haha, what, why am I don't know. And I think I definitely have unconsciously gone for that sort of the tone, because I think we've all been in our own semi-horrific situations where all of a sudden you laugh at something because there's nothing else to do. So
I guess that all brings me to one more question I wanted to ask about, I guess, your choice of characters. You all have female protagonists. And I would say, you know, when I was reading these, and one of the reasons I fell in love with these books was that it was very sort of female centric. And I wondered if those characters had, I don't want to say autobiographical elements, because clearly they're not totally autobiographical, but I wondered, as, you know, because with a debut novel, often you see people writing about their life, right? Or you see people drawing heavily on personal experiences. So I'm just wondering if you brought something personal to any of the characters or to the project when you were writing it, or if it was just something totally cerebral and, you know, as Rachel said earlier, it was this meets this, and it just turned out the way it did turn out. Molly, you want to start?
Sure. There's definitely a lot of autobiographical elements. I think someone asked my sister once if the main character was like me, and she said that it was me on my very worst day. So definitely, there's a lot of elements in me, and I wanted to write about my feelings about the concept of spinsters and how we talk about it as a very outdated concept when I think there's a lot of contemporary relevance. And I also wanted to write about self-harm and see if I could put it in a different context than how you usually see it, you know, sort of like often in a young adult novel, and, you know, everybody gets better at the end. So I may have gone off the topic a little bit, but it's definitely autobiographical. Yeah.
Let's see. Rachel or Lizzie, do you want to speak to that?
I can say that for myself, it did not feel particularly autobiographical. I found her really fun, the main character of my book. I found her really fun to write, because in some ways I was almost like, what if I just did like whatever all the things that I would never allow myself to actually do, like just complete it, like just, you know, anytime someone tells you not to go down that dark hallway or not to do your homework, that she just does not. And so that was really exciting for me to write. I would say almost the ways in which she's similar to me is that it's almost like the things that she would do, it's kind of the opposite of what I would do. So it's almost like, you know, a negative image of who I actually am. But I do think, to go to your earlier question of the tone, I think that I was, with this book, trying to capture a particular emotion that I've felt in my life. Like I set out with this project of this as like, I want to really capture a certain feeling that's like some combination of nostalgia and dread, and kind of have those and put those two emotions together. And it's just something that I have felt in my life. And I was like, how can I kind of try and put this emotion on the page? And so I think that I was trying to get to that particular feeling, but the particular character, I would say, happily, because she's pretty messed up, I don't think she's particularly like me.
I want all our protagonists to hang out.
Yeah.
I would love to see that, because they're all messes.
Yeah. It wouldn't be a great, it wouldn't be a great time for them. Well, actually, maybe they'd have fun.
I like to picture them with like a bottle of bourbon, just having a great time. And if you haven't read all of our books, and once you do, picture it. It'll be fun.
Right, so I have a lot of questions coming in the chat, so I'm going to go there for a second, and then I will come back because I have more questions. Okay, so this one is from Christine. When you're writing the more gruesome or visually horrific parts, do you ever scare yourself as you're writing? So feel free to jump in, whoever wants to answer that first.
I want to know what Molly has to say about it. I'm curious.
I would think between the three of us, mine is the least like, I happily have had is the least gruesome. So which I'm a big baby, so so I'll defer to you too.
I have to admit that I really enjoy it. I knew, like, not to give anything away about the ending, but like the ending, I knew the whole time that was going to be the ending, and I was just like, you can't let yourself write it. Just wait till you get there. It's going to be so good. Yeah, and I definitely probably like overdid it a little bit. I don't know. I think it's fun to just, like Elisabeth with your main character, to just like go as far as you can with the thing, which is absolutely not what you would do in real life. It's very freeing.
Yeah.
Rachel, do you have an answer to that?
Yeah, I definitely gross myself out and freak myself out. Yeah, that's how I know I'm doing a good job. I'm also scared of everything, so I have a lot to leverage. So it's I feel like I'm like cheating writing horror, because I feel like I have a bunch of cheat codes, because I'm afraid of everything. I hear a noise. What's that? So I'm like, oh, I can use this.
I will say that I tend to, at least for me, I get more freaked out from watching. Like, I can write things that I wouldn't be able to watch on a screen. Like, I can write about, you know, I don't know, someone's eye getting poked out or something. But if I were watching a movie, I'd be like, oh, absolutely.
I'm a lot like that too. I'm visually so sensitive that like there have been films where I'm sitting there, I'm like, okay, bye, gotta leave. But it's interesting, there's a little bit of a distance with writing that sort of allows us to experiment and explore, you know, those sides of ourselves. Okay, so there's another question. I have a question about beginnings in horror. Do you have strong opinions about whether or not a horror novel should make readers comfortable before turning the tables on them, so to speak? Or were you more inclined to throw readers immediately into horror? I know in Catherine House, at least, the book opens with 2 lines that immediately throw you into a state of discomfort. And, you know, I think the other ones do, it's pretty apparent right away. So I'll leave it to you. So who would like to answer that?
I can say for about the Catherine House one, I don't have a strong opinion in terms of like whether it should be one way or another. For Catherine House, I wanted it to distinctly, you know, so much of the story is about being caught in this place, and it's about it being so insular, and so this feeling of being trapped, and of it being this really unique time in her life that's just so confined to this one place and these 3 years. So I wanted the whole thing to kind of have this feeling of this strange dream she was having, and it was really important to me that the book didn't start with her, like you see it actually in the part I read, kind of a flashback to her entering, but I really didn't want it to start with her in the outside world and going into Catherine. I wanted it to start with her, you know, in media res or whatever, like kind of like you're already caught in this other world, and I thought that would feel really claustrophobic. So that was certainly on purpose in this project. In terms of like larger rules, I don't know, but for this project, that was on purpose.
So another question is, what are some other, for Rachel, what inspired you to write about such descriptive body horror?
I don't know. I would need to go to therapy and talk to Freud about that, because I never realized that it was so prevalent in my work until it was pointed out to me, because I write short stories as well, and there's some definite body horror there. And I was like, I probably have some issues that I don't care to explore. So somewhere in my subconscious, there's an answer to that question, but I'm too lazy and not willing to go there. So I'm sorry that I can't answer your question.
You're saving it for the fiction, right? Like you don't, I don't know. I mean,
it'll just keep coming out in my fiction if I don't explore it. So
exactly.
That's why I save money on my psychotherapy by just
we don't
writing.
Want it to go away. Yeah. Okay. So here's another one. What are some other narratives, book mythologies, movies, series, horror, otherwise, that inspired or influenced your books? So Lizzie was saying earlier, Rebecca and Jane Eyre, and Molly said Wuthering Heights, and Rachel said The Shining. Are there other books or series or anything that you feel inspired you?
For me, I wanted to, it actually, yeah, I based it somewhat on the fairy tale Bluebeard, which is an old French fairy tale. That's very, very horrible, speaking of horror. So yeah, when I first had the idea, I was like, oh, I kind of want to write a campus story. I had recently graduated, and so I kind of wanted to write something about that time in my life. And I was like, what? And I want to kind of base on a fairy tale, and yeah, I chose Bluebeard. And like looking at it now, it's like, you know, it kind of went off the rails there. I wouldn't say it's, you know, a retelling of Bluebeard, but it kind of has that story pattern, I would say.
Yeah, and you know, also, you know, the Catherine house being sort of constructed almost like a castle, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it isn't. It's this place where people are learning or doing other things.
Yeah.
But I can see that in the sort of visual sort of architecture that you've created and the type of characters.
Yeah. And I just love that whole, like, you know, don't go explore the West Wing type of thing.
Right, yeah, don't go there. Bad things will happen.
Everyone loves that. That's always fine.
Yeah, no, I love that too. And I think it's really alluring as a mythology for writers. And I myself, when I'm writing, often take a sort of archetypal story and try to break it apart and think about it and play with it. It always ends up being totally, you know, disjointed, and no one would ever recognize it. So I love that you did start there. Did Molly and Rachel, did you have any sort of idea of, you know, like a mythology or any, you know, I know that you did mention other books that were influential, but did you have other influences?
Well, I wouldn't say mythology. I think I was influenced by examples of really unhappy women. Emile Zola's women are pretty miserable. But I knew I wanted to bring like sort of a contemporary feel to it. So there's this really horrific French film called In My Skin that I'm not sure I'd recommend, but it like left such an impact on me. And it's very body horror, and just the ways you're trapped in your body. And yeah, I think modern horror films influence a lot, I think.
Something that I wonder about, and you know, I might be coming in from left field here, but I've noticed in your book that there's a lot of beautiful descriptions of like tissues and fabrics, and even in the description that you read about what she was wearing. And you're an editor at Vogue Knitting, which I didn't know until your biography was just read. And I think that you know, as a potential subconscious influence is really interesting. I myself knit, actually, and I wish I had some pieces here that I could show off. But I've found that once you start doing these kind of so-called female things, right, constructing clothes or, you know, having children, for example, or, you know, you have these experiences that are traditionally female, that influences in kind of a sideways way your fiction. At least it does for me. And I love that you actually are very into knitting. You knit, right? You're an editor, but you also knit.
Yeah, I actually, as of last month, I don't work there anymore because the latest month off, but.
Oh, I'm sorry. I hope you're knitting though.
I am. I think though, like especially in the Victorian era, you were your clothes. And I think we see that in the way that men all dressed alike. So they were sort of allowed to have a personality instead. Women, it was what's that outfit you have on? How does your hair look? How have you decorated your house? And I think a lot of the book was about Isla trying to free herself from those things because they didn't mean much to her.
Yeah, and I really appreciated that and loved it about, I love that about your book. And I think that that's something that distinguishes, as I've been reading lots of horror, it's something that distinguishes horror written by women from horror that's written by men. It's really interesting. If I cover up, if I get a galley and just try not to look and just start reading, I can often tell. So Rachel, did you have other influences? You did say when you pitched this, it was The Shining meets
Female Friendship.
Female Friendship.
So I think Jennifer's Body was a big influence. I love that movie. It was really inspired by like the course of like my friendships throughout my 20s and how they changed and how we moved apart. And so as much as it was like The Shining and a little bit of, Hill House, Shirley Jackson, it was also like Judy Blume, like Summer Sisters, and Anne Patchett's Truth and Beauty is one of my favorite books about female friendship. So I think it was kind of like equally influenced by like horror and also by, for me, things that ring, like pieces that ring true about female friendship.
Yeah, and the dialogue in your book, I found to be very spot on, very realistic. And I don't know if you said that you studied film.
I studied screenwriting, so
right. Okay.
yeah.
So I love that about the book. And I thought, I often felt like I would just sort of read the dialogue just to feel the characters. So did you work on this as a script at all, or for yourself, or did you write dialogue separately, or what's your approach to writing dialogue?
So I get basically I write first person. So usually I'm in character so like in this, I was like in character as Elise. And then my characters are so real to me that I can hear them talking in my head. Which is perfectly normal. So I think sometimes my favorite experience of writing is if I write a line of dialogue and my character taps me on the shoulder and is like, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say it like that. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. And then I go back and fix it. I just have I have all of their voices set in my head. So that's how I kind of go about writing dialogue. And then I didn't set out to write The Return as a script. I actually had kind of a difficult transition after studying screenwriting to writing prose, because like for the first few years I was writing prose, I was just like, and then they go here, and then they go there, and then they say this, and they say this. Right. So it took me a while to kind of like get into like writing sentences and really like focus on a sentence level. So from a screenwriting background, there are certain things I had to unlearn and certain things I clung to, because I think, writing dialogue for me is a lot of fun, and I hope it's a strength.
It was very fun to read, I have to say. And it's interesting because I do hear, I have friends who are screenwriters, and they look at, what I do sometimes, and they're like, there's just so many words. Like, how do you do it? And it's interesting because I think that screenwriting is also an interesting discipline. And I've been playing with it myself. I wrote an audio drama. So 10 scripted episodes, basically just to play with that stripping away of elements. Because I'm someone who will just go and throw everything in, right? Like everything that I can think of will go in. And sometimes it's interesting to sort of strip it back and see what the essentials are. Okay, so we had another question. What were each of your paths to getting an agent and landing your debut book publication? And do you have advice for sitting down and finally completing a first novel? Also, you are all great. That's from Steph Grossman.
I know Steph. We took a writing class together.
Oh, okay.
So yeah. I'll go first because mine was pretty quick. I actually found my agent through a Twitter pitch contest that I did last minute, and I almost didn't do, and I was like, I'll shoot my shot. So it was just like the luckiest moment ever, and just
so can you explain which Twitter pitch?
Oh, it was Pit Dark. So they do it every October and May. #Pit Dark. And Yeah, I highly recommend it. If you have any questions about it, DM me on Twitter. We can talk about it. But that's how I found my agent. And as far as finishing your book, just the best advice I ever got was just do it. Like, don't think about it. Just do it. Don't think too much. Just write. If it's not perfect, you can come back and fix it, but you can't edit what's not there. So that's for me.
How about you, Lizzie? How did you get your agent, and how did your first book come to be?
I got my agent. I actually, it was kind of a funny thing. So a friend of mine had just read Her Body and Other Parties, the Carmen Maria Machado book, and said like, oh, I feel like you would like this writer. And I looked at the book in a bookstore. I hadn't even bought it yet, and I just looked at the back of who she thanked, because I was like, oh, I'm going to start querying people. I'll just see who she thanks if my best friend says that her writing is like mine. And I just cold emailed him, and he wrote back the next day and said, sure, I'll read your manuscript. And then he called the day after that and was like, sure, I'll represent you. But it all happened so fast I hadn't even realized really that he was offering to represent me when he said that.
You're like, yeah, let's get coffee. Okay.
Yeah, that's actually literally what happened. Then he sweetly took me out to lunch and he said something about like finding an agent, and he was like, you realize that I'm your agent now? And I was like, oh. So that's what happened. In terms of finishing a book, I totally agree with Rachel. You have to like, it is one of those things, sadly, that you cannot like, inspiration will not take you where you need to go. It'll give you the 5% you need, and then the last 95% is going to be just sitting down at the computer and being really sad about how hard it is, but then just working through that. My only advice is to like choose the time that you can do really regularly, and it doesn't matter what time it is, but like let's say 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. or 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. or something like that. If you can have just one particular time that you're like, this is when I write, that's, I think, having brute amount of time more than anything else is what will get you with enough words to call a novel in the end.
And Molly?
My path was a little longer. I wrote to everyone, just basically all the agents. And after a while, and my agent, like, she kept being like, oh, I'm getting to it. Just like, give me a little more time. And I'd be like, I'm going to write her off. And then she'd be like, no, I'm still reading it. But after that, it was pretty quick, which was exciting. And I'm gonna agree with you guys about just sitting down and doing it. I think if you get yourself a goal, like I generally try and do like 1,000 words, and even if 900 of them are terrible, it will have at least advanced the story along enough for the next 1,000 words. And even if it doesn't go exactly where I'm wanting it to, it's going. You're still on the road, and your car is moving. And yeah, sometimes it really sucks. Sometimes I hate writing.
Yeah, and finding a routine, right? I agree. I think that everyone here would agree that finding some kind of routine so that it's not inspiration that's making you write, but actually just, it's almost like a job, right? And so you say, okay, this is the time I'm writing, and this is what I can hope to expect. I've even been experimenting lately with having a daily word count. I mean, I've done that when I'm in the middle of a book. I have that anyway, but even when I'm not quite yet in a book and I'm just writing things for myself, I still try to write something, whether it's something for a newsletter or something for something else, just to keep it all going. So I think it's really about habit and dedication over the long haul, because we all know that now you have another book, everyone's expecting another book. So that brings me to a question I wanted to ask. Are you writing another book, or are you thinking about writing another book, or are you going to be just happy with this one? Let's start with Rachel.
Yes.
So
I'll give you the big yes.
Okay, good. Good. All right. No more than that. Just yes. Yes, you're going to write.
Just yes.
Okay. Perfect. How about you, Lizzie?
Yes, I'm working on something. Man, second book is way harder. Or, maybe it's like birth. I've not birthed a child, but I hear, you kind of like forget, like I hear like, I have been literally like been looking back at earlier drafts of Catherine House just to like remind myself of like how bad it was at the beginning. I find that really like has been bolstering me, because like I'm looking at what I'm doing now and I'm like, oh God, Jesus Christ. And so like, yeah, looking back at earlier drafts of Catherine House to be like, okay, just keep remembering that it didn't start out like fully revised. Like it took a while to get there. So yes, so yes, I am working on it. It is a emotional journey.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
Emotional support.
And Molly, do you feel like answering that question, or?
Sure. I have some pages. I don't know what is going to happen. I feel like my first book, I knew the ending, so I was like, that is where I am going to. And now I'm just like, how about this? I'll take this little thing. And I think the difference maybe of writing the first and the second one. The first, it feels more like you're writing for yourself, and the second, now you're like, oh, people expect a thing. And I wasn't trying to live up to anything before. I was just really like kind of enjoying the process of it. And now the process is a little bit, it's more job-like. It's a pretty good job though.
Yeah. Okay. I want to just take, one or two more questions here. Okay. So this is from John. I think it says McNally Jackson, so I'm assuming it's John. Have the authors found the past few months to be particularly generative for their writing, or has lockdown and the long, slow road to reopening made their fiction writing difficult?
It has not been, it comes in waves for me. I'll have like a super productive week and then a super not productive week. I mean, just on a personal level, I have a job besides this. So, working, I don't have kids, so I'm not trying to do child rearing while also doing these other things. But it is really interesting to suddenly go from, before I would work from 9 to 5 and then come home and then I could write. And now it's like, oh, I could kind of answer a bunch of work emails, and then I have a bunch of writing work emails, and then I need to like work on the next project. And, the days just kind of blurs into this mess of duties. And then you're like, oh my God, and I have to feed myself and I got to do the dishes. It's just, I think we're all kind of experiencing like, wow, it's a really interesting vibe. So I'll have a week where I just like, I'm knocking out a lot of words. It's really great. And then I have a week where I accomplish nothing. So I don't know. We'll see.
Rachel, have you been able to work during all of this, or is it like impossible?
Yeah, so I'm very type A, and I need to write, and like when I wake up in the morning, I need to write and get my word count, or I can't do anything else. So I've been able to stick to it. And so I write every day and I work every day. I think emotionally it's been a roller coaster, but I'm kind of tied to my routine. I need to have that routine. It's part of what keeps me sane. So I haven't been any more or less productive. It's just kind of been, I have to stay consistent to try, and otherwise I'd just be face down on the floor for the foreseeable future.
And Molly, are you able to work? Well, you're not working for your other job now, so has that been helpful, or has that been?
I sort of thought, I'm doing a little bit of freelance, but I sort of felt like, oh, I'm now a full-time writer. This is wonderful. But I immediately became more like Elisabeth and being like, well, what about this thing that I have to do? And what if that movie leaves the Criterion Channel? I have to watch that now. I have to clean the bathroom, which I will avoid like the plague. It's definitely, but then it's sort of like exercise in that you put it off and you put it off, and then when you do it and you're like, why wasn't I doing this before? This feels great. I feel so much better now. So I think it's if I can get myself into that mindset, I have a really good week. And if I skip one, it's easier to skip two, and so.
That is totally my experience. That is like completely, yes, that is my life.
Well, soon it's all going to go back to normal, right? Or so we like to tell ourselves. Maybe it won't. But so we're almost at the end of the hour. And I guess, my next question is about, it's just a quick question. And because so many of you, both, I think it's Rachel and Molly, you studied film as well, right? Mm-hmm. I think, Lizzie, have you studied film too? I'm sorry, I don't remember in your biography.
I studied art history, and I took film classes.
Okay, so I'm just interested. So right now there's so much attention to adaptation of books, and what adaptation means. And I'm wondering if you're interested in doing adaptation in any form. Whether that's a series for television, or if it's film, or if it's something poetry, something else. Do you feel like your work, these books, which are so unique and actually very perfect as they are as novels, do you agree or disagree that they should be adapted? Silence.
Well, I'll go. I mean, so The Return was optioned for TV. I don't know hopefully.
But
are you happy about, like, how do you?
Yeah, I think I don't want to touch it. I don't want to it'd be a lot to kind of I don't understand, it seems like a lot to kind of take something that you created in such a that you created as a novel, right, and then have to kind of transform it. When I wrote The Return, it felt very much like 3-act structure, like I could see it being turned into a movie. Mm-hmm. So when it was approached for TV, I was kind of like, wouldn't that be harder? Like, it kind of you could just plop it into a movie. But then I think there's a lot of different, when you transform something into a different medium, there's so much opportunity. So I think if it does come to fruition, I'm super, super interested to see where it goes and come up with ideas. But also I think, I don't know about for anyone else, but I kind of would like to see where somebody else's imagination takes it. Or else it's kind of the same, The Shining was a big influence for me. And if you read The Shining and watch the Stanley Kubrick film, there's 2 different things, and both forms have such value and are so unique unto themselves. So I think that's really interesting from a film student perspective to see the differences. So part of me as a fan of that, watching adaptations, is wants to see it happen with my work and kind of take a back seat.
But you're okay with it. You're okay with
yeah.
And
it's once you write a book, it's not yours. Once you publish a book, it's not yours anymore. That's something that I don't know if the other authors feel the same, but once you publish it, it's not yours. Other people can read your characters, they can interpret it, they can, so you kind of have to let go. And I think that's a good thing. I'd be curious to see what other people think.
I would say my feelings about adaptation are basically the same. I also, Catherine House was optioned, and I made peace early on that it was kind of I have no interest in becoming a screenwriter, and I would be interested to see what someone else does with it, but at that point I would just so not feel like it's my project. And I would hope that it would, like, my favorite adaptations in general are ones that are not super faithful to whatever it is they're adapting. So yeah, I completely agree. I think, and right now I'm like, oh yeah, I'd be fine with it. I'm sure if it actually happened that it would be something that I would, I'm sure that I would not be as at peace as I'm saying that I am now. But right now, yeah. But right now, I don't care. Sure, see whoever wants to
That's good,
play,
right?
go for it.
Well, we're at the end of our time, very nearly, and so I don't think there are any more questions from people who are watching. But I did want to just say thank you so much to all three of you, and thanks again to McNally Jackson and to everybody that has come out tonight to watch this. And I wanted to just give you a chance to quickly tell people how they can find you, if you're on social media or your website, where people can come and get you, find you, send you a note, fan letter. Rachel, do you want to start?
Sure. So I'll give you my website, and my Twitter and Instagram are linked there. It's Rachel-Harrison.com. I'll get back to you.
.org. .something.
And I can say my website is Elisabeth is spelled with an S, so you can say ElisabethThomasBooks.com, and my Twitter is Lizzie Thomas, @Lizzie Thomas, and Lizzie is spelled with S's, even though it's pronounced like Z's. I don't know, guys, but that's the way it is.
And you, Molly?
My Twitter is Poppycock LTD, and my Instagram is Miss Otis Regrets with underscores between the words.
And I have to tell you that Molly has, there was a little bit of a glitch, but I have to tell you that Molly has the best pictures of hedgehogs on, it's a hedgehog, right?
So my beloved hedgehog, she was 4.5 years old. She passed away in April.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But thanks to everything going on, I got to spend extra time with her, and it was good. It was a good thing.
Okay. Well, her hedgehog is memorialized on her Instagram feed, so I think you should go and take a look. Okay, thanks to everyone who came out, and thanks to the authors. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you, Danielle. And congratulations, Rachel and Elisabeth and Molly. I can't wait to hand sell your books. Till then, McNallyJackson.com has them. It never closes. So buy it from us. And have a wonderful Friday night. And have a wonderful weekend. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.